Okay, here we are. This is the second part of the endocrine system podcast. And what I'd like to do before we go on with all the hormonal cycles and things with regard to maintaining homeostasis in a living thing, I did want to share with you this animation that is showing a little bit about how that signal transduction pathway works in a cell. Remember, the signal transduction pathway applies to those protein-based hormones that cannot enter a cell, but instead they dock on a receptor on the surface of a target cell and cause something then to happen on the inside of that target cell. So let me just step you through this animation real quick. First of all, just so you're understanding what we're seeing, this blue area here is a cell membrane with a nice diagram of what the phospholipids look like. Remember these polar heads and these nonpolar tails in the middle. Here's the outside of the cell. Here's the inside of the cell. Okay. Now, they're showing you how this would be set up. There's the membrane again. We've backed off and made the membrane a bit smaller so we can emphasize the receptor that is embedded in the surface, a transmembrane protein, perhaps a glycoprotein, something like that, with a receptor peeping out of the surface. This is that G protein that we talked about. It's really a complex of several things. Notice that it has GDP embedded in it. It is similar to the way ATP works, and we'll talk about that later. Right now, this is the unenergetic or less energetic form of GTP, called GDP. You'll understand that better once we talk more about ATP. At any rate, that's that G protein complex. This is another enzyme, and again, you can tell this is an enzyme because of the ACE ending. They refer to it as adenylate cyclase here. I've seen it given another name, I think adenyl cyclase. At any rate, this up here is being generally referred to as a ligand. Remember, the term ligand is nothing fancy. It's just the term for something that sticks into a receptor, a molecule that sticks into a receptor. In this case, the ligand happens to be a protein-based hormone. This, I think, is supposed to be representing to you the epinephrine pathway that we looked at in the PowerPoint earlier. Now, what we're going to do in the first little step here is the ligand comes into the receptor, and if you'll notice, the receptor changed its shape, okay? And as a result, became ready to accept the G protein complex, which causes the G protein complex to alter its shape. These are called conformational changes. Conformational changes are changes in shapes in proteins that occur and allow them to work, to do their jobs. Okay? Now, because of that shape change, the G protein loses that less energetic GDP molecule and accepts a much more energetic GTP molecule. Again, very similar to ATP. Just not quite as much energy in it. Okay? Now that acceptance of GTP activates that G protein complex, and if you'll notice, it kind of splits up into two parts here. It's not really important for what we need to know about, but this G protein complex is now shaped to interact with this adenylate cyclase, which then activates this enzyme, and what this enzyme does is then begins converting ATP molecules into cyclic AMP molecules. If you'll remember, those cyclic AMP molecules are the secondary messengers. These are the things that are going to activate enzymes and eventually cause the reaction, the events that we want to happen. Now, once that happens for a certain amount of time, I believe I read that this is actually a kind of a timed reaction here. Eventually, this will G protein will disengage. The GTP becomes GDP again, and it's inactivated, waiting once again for another ligand to come up and stick into the substrate. And there you can see the ligand releasing from that receptor right there. Okay, so that's kind of going over that signal transduction pathway. Now this does not take it past the point of that adenylate cyclase and the making of this cyclic AMP. Beyond that, you would have those AMP molecules activating other enzymes and getting a product like lots and lots of glucose, for example, if this is the that epinephrine pathway. All right, so I'm going to get out of that, and we're going to go back to this. Okay. Please remember, hormones and many things in the body we're gearing to maintain homeostasis. If we have some particular body condition that we want to maintain at a certain level, okay, perhaps that level gets too high, so a gland produces some hormone that lowers that body condition. But suppose we start to go too low, then some gland will produce a hormone that will raise that body condition. But if it gets too high, we will start to go through the cycle again. This is called negative feedback. You should know what that phrase implies. Basically, it's a yin and yang. If we get too high, we're going to bring it down. If we get too low, we're going to bring it up. It's negative feedback. If things get bad, we're going to fix it. Okay? Negative feedback. We're always keeping something at a particular level. That's different from positive feedback, where we're actually encouraging more and more and more of an event to happen. Okay, so we'll see an example of that too. This is something we looked at the very beginning of the year, how the body controls body temperature. If body temperature gets too high, if you'll remember, the hypothalamus monitors that and sends nerve signals that cause your skin to sweat, dilates blood vessels so that we can release body heat to the skin and to the environment. But if your body temperature gets too low, again, the hypothalamus is going to monitor that, send nerve signals that will cause you to shiver and constrict those blood vessels so that you can keep that heat inside your body at the core to keep your organs warm and all of that. That's something you should remember from the beginning of the year. Now, this is something that you won't. This is new. This is looking specifically at how a particular hormone in the endocrine system works. What we are looking at here is insulin, okay, which regulates blood sugar in your body. If you have not enough insulin in your body, you might have diabetes. Okay, so this is a very, very famous hormone and is associated with a very, very famous problem. Okay, so let's look and see how that works. Okay, if your blood sugar level in your body gets too high, you can see that it's supposed to be maintained at around 90 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood. Okay, your pancreas is designed to recognize that your blood sugar level is getting too high. If it does, the pancreas will secrete insulin into your blood, a hormone. There are specific cells in the pancreas called the islets of Langerhans. So if you see that phrase, please do not freak out. It is just talking about cells in the pancreas that secrete insulin. In particular, they are beta cells. There are also alpha cells that do something else. So if you see any reference to these, it's insulin-secreting pancreas cells. That's all it is. Okay? Now, insulin stimulates your body cells, your muscle cells, your whatever body cells you've got, to take up sugar from the blood. Okay? In particular, the liver is going to pick up that sugar and store it in the form of glycogen. Okay? Remember, glycogen is when we take a bunch of glucose molecules and stick them together in a long chain. It's kind of like starch, only animals can make glycogen and they can't make starch. It's not exactly like starch. It's branched, whereas starch is a straight line molecule. Also, insulin will reduce your appetite, so that makes sense. We don't want to be eating when we already have a lot of blood sugar in our body, so we're going to reduce that. We don't need to eat more, so we reduce the appetite as well. But suppose our blood sugar level gets too low. The pancreas, once again, would recognize that and secrete this time a different hormone, and it is called glucagon. What's it called? Glucagon. Okay? Also secreted by the islets of Langerhans, but there are different cells in there. This time it's alpha cells, but all in the pancreas that are secreting this hormone. This hormone has the opposing effect. This will cause the liver to actually release glucose from the glycogen molecules that the liver is storing, and it will also cause you to experience hunger so that you will eat to get your blood sugar up. Now, once again, we do this too well, we get too much, then the blood sugar level would be too high, and we'd start the whole cycle over again. Always opposing. These are antagonistic hormones, if you will. They work against each other. One's pulling something one way, one's pulling something the other, and we meet in the middle. Okay? That is a very key way that many, many hormones work to help us maintain homeostasis. Now, blood osmolarity, meaning the amount of water in your blood, solute concentration in your blood, okay, is also monitored and controlled by your endocrine system. Okay? If you get dehydrated, you are losing too much water, okay? That means your solute concentration is getting too high in your blood. Your hypothalamus, a part of your brain, which we're going to talk about in a minute, will sense that. Send a signal to the pituitary gland, which is a very important gland in your hormonal system, which will secrete a molecule, a hormone called ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. Now, a diuretic, if you were to buy a diuretic at the drugstore, these things make you lose excess water, okay? If you're retaining water for some reason, diuretics will make you lose that water. Essentially, you'll pee a lot. So anti-diuretic means we're going to retain that water. So that's what this does, and it causes your kidney to increase the amount of water that it is reabsorbing from the body fluids that it's accepting from the glomerulus and all that, and the nephron. Okay? So it will also increase thirst, because obviously you're feeling dehydrated. We want to make you thirsty, so you will drink. So anti-diuretic hormone does both those things. But suppose you get too much water. Is that possible? Well, actually, yes, it is. So if your blood osmolarity gets too low, meaning you have too much water in your body and too little solute in your body, then a whole opposing string of events will come into play to counteract that, hormone-driven events. I really don't want you to focus too much on this lower half of the diagram because it's too much detail and nobody should be asking you about this, but I do think that ADH comes up every now and then, so I think you should know what that one focuses on. Okay? Now, we do need to focus closely on how the nervous system and endocrine systems do interact, and they do very importantly. The hypothalamus is nerves. It is part of the brain. It is nervous tissue. It is not endocrine system glandular tissue. It is the master, absolute master controller, okay, of the endocrine system, but it is not endocrine itself, okay? It is receiving information from sensors, nerves, if you will, but nerves literally, sensors, if you will, all around your body about how internal conditions are going. So it's very important. It will then tell a very important gland to release certain hormones if it detects things are going too far in one direction or the other. So, the hypothalamus deals with what are called releasing hormones, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And it also communicates using these releasing hormones directly with the pituitary gland. That is considered the master gland. It answers to this nerve control center up here, but as far as the endocrine system glands are concerned, this is the big daddy. Okay? He's the one that is most in charge. Okay? So this is the nervous endocrine system connection, this hypothalamus pituitary gland link. Okay? Now, the pituitary in response to whatever the hypothalamus tells it will secrete a broad range of different hormones. These are called tropic hormones that regulate other glands in the body. So these hormones will tell other body endocrine glands what to do. Okay? So we've got hypothalamus telling the pituitary what to do, and the pituitary in turn tells other glands what to do. Okay? Hypothalamus tells the pituitary, tells other glands. Okay? That's the chain of command. Now, I do want you to look at this diagram over here that shows the relationship between the pituitary and the hypothalamus. This is in the base of your brain here. And if you'll notice, we've got stuff linking the pituitary, which is this thing, with the hypothalamus, which is that thing. And the pituitary, it's really important that you see, is made up of two parts. This half and this half, okay? This part is anterior, meaning it is the part that is pointing towards your face from the inside of your head. This is pointing towards your face. This half, the posterior, is pointing towards the back of your head, okay? And they secrete different things, okay? This is showing you This is showing you flipped around the other way. So this is as if you are looking, here's your eye and your nose, you're looking this way. The anterior pituitary is facing your face and the posterior is facing the back of your head. The anterior pituitary releases thyroid stimulating hormone, which is dealing with stimulating the thyroid gland, obviously. ACTH is a hormone. Nobody's going to ask you about it, I hope. Growth hormone. Gonadotropic hormones, which are going to be affecting the testes and the ovaries, the reproductive organs. Okay, hence gonadotropic. This is gonads' reproductive structures. Okay. Prolactin, which is dealing with milk production, at least in mammals. It does a variety of things in other vertebrates, but in mammals it's dealing primarily with milk production after childbirth. Okay. MSH, we're not going to talk at depth about that one. Now, these last two, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, ADH, which we just saw about recently, are the only two of significance that are secreted by the posterior pituitary. So most hormones are secreted by the anterior pituitary, and you can see all the variety here. There's just a couple that are secreted by the posterior, and we will talk about, we've already mentioned this one, we'll talk about this one shortly. Okay? All right. This is just an aside, but an important one, and it'll mean more to you after we've gone more in depth into evolution. But just to note, just like vertebrate limb, the original vertebrate limb that arose from the first land-going fish-like things that allowed them to crawl onto land, and the vertebrate limb eventually became not just this stumpy leg, but evolved into these wonderful, amazing arms and hands, wings and bats, flippers and whales and dolphins, hooves and land-going mammals that run like horses, a wide variety coming from this one original stumpy thing that allowed the first vertebrates to crawl out of the water onto land. All show fundamental common ancestry, though on the surface they look very different. Well, this can be seen in hormones and chemicals in living things as well. Prolactin, the same basic chemical, is used by different vertebrates in amazingly different ways. In mammals, we associate prolactin with milk production. In birds, it metabolizes fats. In fish, it deals with water balance. In amphibians, it deals with maturation and going through the tadpole phase and all of that kind of thing. So, same fundamental hormone, kind of like the same fundamental stumpy limb, has gotten utilized and sculpted to be used in different organisms in different ways. We see this kind of pattern over and over, not just with limbs, but with chemicals as well. And also another hormone closely related to this hormone in the same family of genes that produce these does another thing altogether. So again, evolutionary linkage is demonstrated in many avenues in living things, and not just physical features that you can see, but also biochemically as well. Okay? So, now let's look at another hormonal cycle. This one is involved in, and this is not so much a cycle as it is, well, I guess we could look at it like that. This one is involved in regulating metabolism. We start with the hypothalamus, okay? The hypothalamus releases to the pituitary something called TSH releasing hormone. TSH releasing hormone for short is called TRH. So the hypothalamus detects something in the body that tells it, okay, we need to regulate metabolism in a particular way here. So it releases TRH, which tells the anterior pituitary that it had better release some TSH, okay, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, pretty darn quick. So, hypothalamus has a releasing hormone that tells the anterior pituitary to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. We need to stimulate the thyroid to do something, okay? What does the thyroid need to do? Well, the thyroid produces, when it is stimulated, thyroxine hormones, right there. Okay, so the thyroid is going to produce thyroxines, okay, which help to stimulate metabolism and development. They do that by stimulating bone growth, mental development. You can read, I'm reading it to you. All kinds of stuff are controlled by the thyroxine hormones produced by the thyroid gland. Now, however, these thyroxines are made only when the actual thing that's secreted from the thyroid, which is a chemical called tyrosine, is combined with iodine. And the only way humans get iodine is from the diet. You have to eat it. So this will not become that which helps do all of this unless there's iodine being consumed by the person. Okay? So, goiter is a disease that is caused by a lack of iron in the diet. Now, what happens then is the hypothalamus, in this case, says, okay, we need to release some thyroid stimulating hormone, so it releases releasing hormone that tells the anterior pituitary to release TSH, which then tells the thyroid to get busy. The thyroid will release that tyrosine, but because there is no iodine, we cannot make these. Okay? So that's not going to happen. Well, the because of that, because there is no thyroxine being made, then this never feeds back up here, thyroxine, to tell the hypothalamus, okay, we're making some thyroxine now, so you can stop telling us to make some, we're already making it. So the hypothalamus, not getting any signal that thyroxine is being made, because it isn't, because there's no iodine, keeps sending releasing hormone, which keeps telling the pituitary to keep doing this, to keep the thyroid, to keep making this, which is not getting made because there's no iodine. So what happens is the thyroid is overworked, because the hypothalamus is never getting a signal to stop. And this causes goiter, which is this incredibly enlarged thyroid gland that you see in this woman here. Okay? Because there's no iodine in the diet. Pretty amazing result, just because we didn't get a little bit of iodine, and it doesn't take much. Okay? Okay. Regulation of blood calcium is also important. We talked about the use of calcium in the nervous system with the release of neurotransmitters. Of course, you know calcium is important in making your bones and all of that. So we have to have the blood calcium level maintained at a particular level. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. 10 milligrams per 100 mLs of blood. Okay? Well, if we get too high, the thyroid, once again, will recognize that. And the thyroid will begin releasing a hormone called calcitonin. This IN should indicate to you that this is a protein-based hormone. If you'll remember, pepsin was a protein, and so on. That IN is typical of a protein ending. Now, that calcitonin will do a couple of things. First of all, it will decrease the amount of reabsorption of calcium that the kidney does. We'll let some calcium just go out in the urine if the blood calcium level is too high, we have too much. We will also take some of this excess blood calcium and put it in the bones where it might be needed. We'll take that and stuff it away in the bones where it can be stored. Okay? But if we get too low in calcium, maybe because we are getting rid of it too efficiently or whatever, then there's another gland embedded in the thyroid, and it's these little spots right here called the parathyroid gland, and that will release something called parathyroid hormone, or PTH. It's not hard to remember. The parathyroid releases parathyroid hormone. What that does is it tells the bones to release some of this calcium because our calcium level in the blood has gotten too low and we need it. It also tells the kidney to stop peeing out the calcium, to reabsorb it because we don't want to lose it because we need it because it's too low. And then again, if the blood calcium level gets too high, then we'll start the whole cycle over again. Again, negative feedback. We're keeping things in check. All right? This is showing you some other stuff. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, but we will increase the calcium uptake in the intestines too. My bad. All right, I'm going to stop here because we have to do the female reproductive cycle, and that's kind of long and tedious, so I think I'll stop it, and we'll make this a part 3 coming up. All right, thanks a lot. Toodaloo.